May I invite Ambassador Verma, who is former ambassador of India to the Russian Federation and currently the Distinguished Fellow at the Vivekananda International Foundation, to talk us through the topic on Russia and resource geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific. Ambassador, please.
Oh, okay. I'll just do that like this. Thank you. Good afternoon, namaskar to everyone. Absolutely delighted to be here. The second time I'm speaking at the Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue, and we wish to congratulate Admiral Karambir Singh and Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan for putting up an absolutely fantastic event, and their team. They do a splendid job. To the senior officers of the Indian Navy who are present here and are supporting this dialogue, I think our deep appreciation. I've been asked quickly after the very sensible, very appealing presentation of the perspective of the small states. I have been asked to jump into the other end of the pool and give the perspective, not speaking on behalf of Russia, but speaking about Russia, which is the largest country in the world. So much as we would like to keep geopolitics out, tamed, caged, put into a box, locked up, when Russia walks into the room, a whole lot of geopolitics also walks into the room. So I'm afraid I can't avoid a little bit of... So the topic that has been given to me is the following. I will address it in the perspective of 3 points: geopolitics, commodities, and connectivity. And I'll draw 5 conclusions at the end of my presentation. But what is my main argument? The intersection of geopolitics and commodities and connectivity is central to analyzing Russia and its resource geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific. It's impacting the region, definitely. It is also impacting global politics in quite unanticipated ways. Geopolitics, of course, the driving force of geopolitics, the latest trigger is the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which started in its active form in February 2022. But it's not just a war between Russia and Ukraine, which is, of course, now into its 3rd year, and is slowly turning in Russia's favor. That is the situation on the battlefield. But it's more than a conflict between Russia and Ukraine in Ukraine. It is also a larger conflict between Russia and the West. And one of the primary instruments of the West, apart from supplying arms to Ukraine, is to impose very severe sanctions on Russia, more than 22,000 at last count, intended to impose on Russia such economic and punitive measures that it would change Russian war calculus, the calculations that Russians do about the war, and force Russia to the negotiating table, and force Russia to withdraw from Ukraine. While these sanctions have imposed severe economic costs on Russia, and it is quite possible will weaken Russia in the medium and long term, the sanctions themselves have been a spectacular failure in changing the essential Russian calculus about the war. What has also happened is that this has also affected Russia's own response to the schism that has now appeared between Russia and the West, which is to pivot towards Asia, pivots towards the East, as they call it. And this pivot has largely been to expand relations with China and India, but also expand relations with the Global South, with BRICS, with SCO, and other countries. The relationship between Russia and China has come up for a lot of comment. Trade between Russia and China has increased to around $250 billion, almost 100% increase in the last 2 years. Large majority of the trade is in Russia's favor because Russia exports to China. The exports are in energy, agriculture, machine tools, and things like that. And in return, Russia gets a number of commodities which are of essence to its warfighting abilities in the Russia-Ukraine war, but there have been no arms transfers from China to Russia in this respect, though there have been some dual-use items that have been come forward. In terms of connectivity, the cutoff from the West has forced Russia to turn towards the East, for which it is better placed than turning towards the South. So remember three directions. It is cut off from the West. It means that the European market has almost completely dried up. Not fully dried up. I think it's important to remember when our European friends tell us why India is importing so much oil from Russia. We would also like to ask them, why are you still importing LNG from Russia and coal and fertilizers from Russia? So it is not completely dried up, but what is dried up is oil. So oil that we used to go to Europe is now down almost 80%. The additional oil that is available with Russia is now going to the international market, to Russia, to China, to India. India is a big beneficiary of that. Gas, which we used to go to Europe, is now not being supplied to Europe. Almost 90% has come down. This has reduced revenues for Russia to conduct its war, but it has not weakened or weakened its war effort. With respect to China, there is already Power of Siberia 1, which the Chinese benefit because there's a land border between Russia and China, which there is none between Russia and India. So while it is easy for Russia to transfer resources from the west to the east, it is more difficult for Russia to transfer resources from Russia to the south, which is to the Gulf, to India, and to the Indian Ocean area. This is further complicated by the fact that the pipelines or the shipping routes go through very contested areas. Russia is hit back against the West by improving its relations with dramatically with DPRK, with Iran, which have almost moved to a higher level of defense cooperation, which has completely upset the security calculus in the Northeast area, which is one of the core areas of the Indo-Pacific. And how does this translate into American response? America has strengthened AUKUS. It has strengthened the trilateral between the United States, Japan, and Korea. And it is looking for additional partners in the Indo-Pacific area, including Philippines. What it has also done is that it has created a heightened sense of insecurity amongst America's Asian allies, particularly Japan and Korea. And this debate that has arisen in Japan about having an Asian NATO is actually fundamentally a Japanese worry about the inadequacy of the American security commitment in the face of increased DPRK, Japan, China, Russia axis, the so-called axis that is now being. Is the Russia-China relationship an alliance? The answer is no. It is coordinated deterrence. It is coordinated political posturing. It is coordinated diplomatic posturing in BRICS and ACO at the Security Council. But it is, I don't think it is an issue that, so there are critical limits to what Russia and China can do together, but the essential glue that is putting Russia and China together is the schism that has appeared between Russia and the West. What are the key commodities that Russia is involved with, which is critical to global markets? Of course, oil, gas, and LNG are the well-known ones, but Russia also exports a lot of coal, fertilizer, other agricultural commodities of the list you saw in the morning, but also uranium, titanium, nickel, aluminum, copper, and other commodities. Now, the inability of the sanctions regime to cripple the Russian banking financial system, weakened it but not crippled it. The ability of Russia to access additional markets, the ability of Russia to use the international system despite the dominance of the dollar to find avenues, difficult though it is the current, who benefits from all this? Of course, the extraordinary beneficiary of this current geopolitical flux is China in many ways. Firstly, China is able to dictate the terms of what it purchases from Russia, especially in energy, because it is one of the biggest customers for Russian energy. It is also in a position to dictate future terms, the reason why the Power of Siberia 2 pipeline between Russia through Mongolia to China is still not agreed upon, because the Chinese are pressurizing Russia to offer it very substantial concessions, which is not favorable to Russia. Russia has conceded ground on the BRI. Russia used to be very skeptical about Chinese BRI, but because of its isolation from the West and its inability to take on all the big powers at the same time, it has conceded ground on the BRI. It has conceded ground on the Northern Sea route. It is also put in more emphasis on the North-South corridor, but the troubles in Iran create a new sort of choke point for Russia, because it is unable to come south through Iran, through the Caspian Sea, through Central Asia. So choke points have to be understood not only in maritime terms, but they also have to be understood in Russia has also hit back against the West in Africa. There's a resource conflict that is taking place in the Sahel, partly because of the ability of the Russians to push out French influence in 3 or 4 critical African countries. So the point I'm trying to make is that this Russia-Ukraine conflict has not produced results on either side which were anticipated. It has created surprises, it has created a stalemate, and the consequences are absolutely global. It's not just regional. Of course, it has completely destroyed the foundations of European security. NATO has been expanded. European and defense budgets are going up, which of course changes the calculus of aid that comes to the sustainable development goals or the climate change goals. Russia is now almost into a war economy sort of mode. So there have been fundamental changes, despite the fact that we might head to some peace settlement at some stage during the course of the war. Both Europe, NATO, Russia, Ukraine have been fundamentally transformed. Let me end by 5 basic conclusions. The Indo-Pacific cannot be insulated. So our hope, our perception, especially from India, that we can shape a new regional construct which we can have a rule-based international order. The coherence of the Indo-Pacific has been impacted majorly by a war that none of the Indo-Pacific powers have been involved with. We didn't start it. We are not part of it in any direct way. But the fact that the Indo-Pacific itself has been impacted. It is impacted from outside, but it is also changing from within. The task of constructing a rules-based order in the region has become more complicated. Building regional rules through plurilateral groupings during global turbulence is, of course, extraordinarily difficult, and this is one such instance and example of that. The second main conclusion. The biggest beneficiary of these trends is China, which only means that geopolitical quagmire, which is presently both the big powers, other 2 big powers find themselves, which is Russia, which is on a back foot in Ukraine, and the United States of America, which is now overextended, not just in Europe, but also in the Middle East. So the essential geopolitical triangular equation at the global level favors China, not because China has done anything extraordinarily clever to deserve this, because of the rather, I would say, strategic deficiencies of both Russian and American policies. For us in the Indo-Pacific, this has a huge impact, and we, as from India at least, we would not like to see this advantage that presently accrues to China to be an irreversible advantage. So to our European friends, our message is We would like you to settle the Ukraine conflict as quickly as possible, re-establish European security as quickly as possible. At some stage, you will have to involve China, involve Russia, and how you do that is up to you. But your ability to play a role in the Indo-Pacific will inevitably get impacted by the continuing insecurity of Europe because of the Russia-Ukraine war. Despite your protestations, it is very clear that we will draw the necessary conclusions on your ability or your willingness to play a role in the Indo-Pacific. India's peace initiative, you would have heard Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia, thereafter to Ukraine. Thereafter, Prime Minister Modi's visit, meeting with Zelensky in New York. We've also had an opportunity for our national security advisor to travel to Moscow to meet Mr. Putin. Has to be understood against this large geopolitical background. It is in India's interest for the war to come to a conclusion as quickly as possible through peace, dialogue, and a bilateral settlement. Because we are absolutely clear in our mind that given the conduct of the war as we have seen it in the last 3 years, a full solution on the battlefield is not possible for either side. So a compromise would be necessary for this to take place. Third, the Indo-Pacific is not just maritime. Of course, it has a very strong maritime dimension, but also its correlation with continental security. Choke points are not just maritime, but also land-related. There is also now a divergence between security dimensions of the Indo-Pacific and new economic drivers of the Indo-Pacific. India, China to a large extent, ASEAN, have very strong economic interests in the region. We've also seen a very fascinating discussion in this conference on how deep sea mining is emerging as a very large area of interest. Fourth, the changing nature of warfare. Gray zone warfare, large armed groups, ISR revolution is enabling military uses not thought possible before. I think the Houthis are a very good example of how relatively a small armed group can cause disruption of such a far-reaching nature in terms of global shipping and things like that. And why is that so? It's not just the prevalence of these armed groups, and they are not just Houthis who are just the only armed group of this nature that are there, but the protection of not only the salience of communication, but protection of the territorial boundaries, the borders of the maritime domain is also equally important. Last, let me say that, let me add a word on India-Russia relations. Russia remains a very strong strategic partner for us. We see the Indo-Pacific as an area where we don't have full agreement. Russia is very strongly against the AUKUS. It is strongly against the security alliances of the United States. It is skeptical on the Indo-Pacific construct strategy. It is also skeptical on Quad, because we have made it very clear that as far as we are concerned, it is free and open. It is open to all. The Quad or the Indo-Pacific really does not contradict any of India's other objectives that we pursue with the for us, the concern on the Russia-China relationship is a matter of concern that we wish to take up as we move forward. India's engagement with the Indo-Pacific cannot be complete without what Prime Minister Modi called in September 2019, India's Act Far East policy. This was during his visit to Vladivostok, where India reached out to Russia to create a framework of engagement which supplements the Act East policy of India. Act Far East policy, of course, because of the nature of the war, the imposition of sanctions and other disruptions in the international community, we have not been able to take it forward. But this is clearly something that we would need to take forward as we go ahead. India, the Russia-Ukraine war has created new challenges for the India-Russia relationship, but I think we've been careful enough and dedicated enough to ensure that some of these negative impacts are limited. There has been some impact, but I think to insulate the relationship to go forward. And right from the beginning of the conflict, we have said that this is something that we would like to take forward with peace returning as quickly as possible on the battlefield. With that, I will stop. Thank you.